Meeting is now being recorded. So welcome to everyone. My name is Christina Hadzi-Petros from the Office of Global Education at Boston College, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to International Education Week at Boston College. A little bit about this year's theme, healing along the fault lines, enduring crisis, maintaining resilience, strengthening engagement, ensuring justice. It's a longer theme, but I think it resonates very well with the presentation that we're going to hear today. As part of International Education Week that we're celebrating throughout the month of November, we're including events across the Boston College community. And today we're going to talk about a new Boston College semester program that started this fall. It's called BC and Croatia, War, Peace, and Reconciliation. Joining us from Zagreb, Croatia today are the BC students who you see sitting comfortably on the yellow couch, who are participating in the program. They still have a little bit more to go, and we can't wait to hear from them. And of course, with us, I'd like to introduce our program directors, Petra Belkovich-Taylor and James Taylor from the European Center for the Study of War and Peace, our partners in Zagreb and in Croatia. And because this is a panel, I'd like to introduce our program directors, and they will, on their turn, introduce our panelists. Petra Taylor is the Executive Director of the European Center for the Study of War and Peace, a native of Croatia and a survivor of the recent war in the Balkans. Petra has earned a doctorate in comparative literature from Harvard University. She specializes in South Slavic and American literatures and is interested in questions of literature as a phenomenon that heals and teaches us how to live with one another, as well as nationalism in literature, as well as multilingual and exile writers. Petra also teaches courses in literature, language, and culture. She's one of our faculty teaching core courses on the program. And James Taylor is the director of the international programs at the ECSWP and a professor of philosophy and peace and conflict studies. He received his doctorate in philosophy from Boston College and specializes in the ethics of transformation at the political, religious, and personal levels, and in the possibilities for reconciliation afforded by intercultural and interreligious dialogue. Welcome, Petra and James, and I would like to turn it over to you here to introduce our panelists and say a few words about the program.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Yes, so thank you for this introduction. And as you all heard, I am from Croatia. I moved to the United States when I was in college to go to college, and I stayed there for a while. This is where James and I also met. And from here, the ideas came about that we would like to create a program students can study at in Croatia. Is a beautiful and fascinating place. And also the idea of war and peace came from my personal life story and our academic interests as well. And it seemed to us it was a good topic to study here because of the historical, geographical, and other aspects of this location. But also this seemed that it was a topic that you can study from many different fields, certainly across humanities, which is what we are currently doing here.
Just to follow up on that a bit, we started the center some years ago with the idea in mind. As I started visiting Croatia and sort of fell in love with Croatia for a number of different reasons, it occurred to us that it's sort of the ideal place to study these topics that we're studying. You know, as a country that had recently moved through a war, that was fashioning for itself a post-war identity, that was having the challenge of reconciling among ethnicities and religions, and developing a transparent political system. it sort of appeared to us as the right place to develop a program and bring students. So that's what we've tried to do this semester. And so I think what we'd like to do, if it works for you, Christina, is to, we'll introduce the panelists here, and then maybe have them share a little bit about their experience as kind of context for the questions that follow. We have some questions prepared for them. We thought that might be a good sort of interactive way of engaging so that they can share something of what they've learned and talk about some of the challenges involved in the topics we've been studying. Is that okay as a itinerary?
It's wonderful, James. Yes.
Okay, terrific. So maybe you can introduce the.
Well, I was going to suggest you each say your name and your major, and maybe we'll start with that. You'll give all the other reasons why you're here, what you said. Who would like to start? Do you want to start?
I'll start. My name is Sonia, and I'm a political science major.
I'm Adrian, and I'm a sociology major.
I'm Vivian, and I'm a psychology major.
I'm Anju, and I'm an international relations major.
And I'm Megan, and I'm an applied psychology major.
Thank you, guys. So so we will now turn it over to our panelists who become experts on the program since they've almost completed it. They have 10 days left to go. And we will start with our questions, and they've also prepared a presentation. So would it be okay, Christina, do I have a right to share? Can I share their presentation?
Yes, you're a co-host now, and you can share your screen.
So for just the brief general itinerary of what we've done, we put together some pictures of where we've been in Croatia. So for the first 2 weeks, we were on Vis Island, in the town of Vis, and then right next door is also the town of Komija. Keep going.
Is this Komija, right?
Yeah, that's Komija. Also
Those are Komija.
Komija.
Vis has a lot of beautiful beaches, so we spent a lot of time on the beach. And we were still taking classes, but we took classes at like an outdoor restaurant on the terrace. It was a very beautiful, almost vacation-like introduction to the program.
And we spent the first 2 weeks taking a 2-credit class with a BC professor about sovereignty and the different, I mean, it was a multifaceted class, but covering sovereignty and how it relates to the Balkans, but also religion, politics today, why it's an interesting topic.
And then next we went to Zagreb, which is where we spent most of the time here. It's in the city, really convenient location. And then next we took a 1-week trip to Jasenovac and Vukovar, as well as Belgrade.
Well, I was going to say, Jasenovac and Vukovar are places that were affected by different wars in Croatia. So this was a trip that was mostly focusing on different experiences of war here. And then Belgrade, Serbia was obviously bombed by NATO in the 90s. So it was kind of different experiences and the different perspectives that people can have relating to war and peace.
And then for a second class trip, we went to Sarajevo for 1 week as well. We got to visit a lot of different religious sites. Here we're at a mosque. We also saw like a synagogue.
Should I click through?
Yeah, I don't know.
Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
And then those were all like the class trips we've done, but there's a time on the weekend for people to travel, and so some of us have gone to Zadar on the coast, Rovinja, which is on Istra, like the peninsula. Yeah, that's it.
Okay,
Great.
so thank you guys. Stop share. Computer is lagging a little bit.
1 second, folks. Some technical problems.
Can you hear us? Can you understand?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great.
That's great, 'cause we cannot see you.
We can't, we're frozen. If you can see us, we can continue speaking until the computer
Decided
goes
to
through its
come back to
cycle.
us.
Yeah, so thank you guys for the slides. James, you wanna do the
Sure,
first
so
question?
yeah, happy to. So in light of what you've been through this semester, what you've learned about the history of the region, how you've experienced the diversity of its people, religions, geography, architecture, and art, what stands out to you about the Balkans generally as a place of convergence between East and West, North and South, at the borders of Europe? What sort of things really stand out to you? Any of you can take this question.
I think first. Well, I think for us, I mean, most of us coming to Croatia, to the Balkans in general, had very little knowledge of this region. So part of the history that we were first introduced to is the importance that is placed on ethnic and national identity. So within the Balkan region, there are a lot of different prominent ethnicities. In Croatia specifically, you have Croats who are from Croatia, Serbs who are from Serbia, and Bosnians who are from Bosnia. And so you see, as the different empires and kingdoms have ruled over this region since, for centuries, you see each group kind of have a little bit of a different spotlight placed on them. So Croatia in itself is very European, I would say. It's mostly Croats now and very Catholic, and very kind of, it seems pretty Western and European. But when we went to Sarajevo in Bosnia, it was much more Eastern. You see a lot of Turkish influence and Ottoman influence. It's predominantly Muslim. So they're really in just, it was like a 4-5 hour car ride. You can see this crazy difference of different cultures and religions mixing. And Croatia kind of serves as the border of the EU. So it's really interesting to see right inside and right outside the border, the different architecture, art, and religions that are predominant.
Great. Open question again, given what you've experienced, what has been maybe the most meaningful or your favorite place that you visited or stayed in here in the Balkans?
My favorite destination that we traveled to was definitely Sarajevo, and I think that was kind of a group consensus. Just the opportunity to go on an interreligious tour was really impactful, and to hear from all these different religious leaders. It was the first time I've ever been in a mosque, so that was a unique experience. And I just loved how everybody was so welcoming, and they say Sarajevo is like the European Jerusalem, right? So I definitely felt like that when we were there, and yeah, it was a good opportunity.
Okay, great, thank you.
I think Andrew wants to add
No,
something.
please, Andrew.
I also enjoyed Sarajevo the most, but I think that the most impactful was Vukovar, which is a small town that was under siege for a while by the Serbians. And you can still see bullet holes in buildings. I toured a hospital that had been, people were hiding there from Serb bombing. And everyone there still really remembers the history, and it's kept very much alive. And tensions there between Serbs and Croatians are a lot higher than they are in the rest of the country. And we read a book called Hotel Tito by Ivana Goldrich, and she talked about she's from Vukovar, and she talked about her experience as a child. So that made it even more.
And she taught your class too,
She
right?
did, yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think one of the advantages that we have here in Croatia is that we're able to get the authors of these books that we're reading to come and usually have a guest lecture with us. This time she actually taught us a substantial portion of the class itself, which I think was a nice experience. So a couple of other thematic questions. How has your understanding, since you've been in this program, from when you arrived on Vis middle of August to now, when you're just about getting ready to go home, how has your understanding of the task of peace and peacemaking changed in any way?
I think for me, I used to think of peace and violence as pretty clear cut, like very black and white. But I think I'm coming to recognize slowly that peace is very much like, there are so many different versions of it. It can be very passive, it can be very active, it can be impersonal or very personal. So a lot of the countries here are recovering from war, and they're still in a state of pretty passive peace. The government might not function perfectly, or they're kind of in a gridlock where there's no violence, but there's not a lot of progress to move past the trauma caused by the war. And so peacemaking in that sense, when it becomes active and very genuinely achieving something, is a much more difficult process than I originally realized. And I think it requires a lot of intention in engaging people that you are different from. You can't really work within your own circles if you want to create genuine peace that like breaks down barriers and stretches across these countries and nations that have been torn apart by nationalism and ethnic identity groups.
Great.
Going off that, I would say I've definitely realized that peace is not a clear-cut thing, and it's very difficult to achieve, whereas violence seems to make a lot more noise and is a lot easier to enact.
I think one of like the big themes of the course was that if you're not moving forward, the longer that you stay stagnant, you find that you've actually fallen behind. It was such a surprise to people. We don't really know that much about Yugoslavia. Like I was under the impression that it was part of the Soviet Union for like an embarrassingly long time. And so learning about how people thought that they had created such a harmonious collective group of people out of what used to be warring ethnicities, and then realizing when Tito died and Yugoslavia started to fall apart that actually they hadn't quite resolved all of those tensions, it tells you a lot about what can happen when you're not actively moving forward.
Thank you.
Beautifully said.
Yeah, that's nicely said. And it goes well into the next question I have here, which is, why is it so challenging? Or what challenges have you encountered in your readings and so on about the task of hosting the stranger? The stranger can be the ethnic other, it could be the religious other, even political or cultural other. We've talked a lot about the challenge of hosting the stranger. Tell us something about your experience of this and what you've learned.
I've also noticed that Richard Carney is with us, and we certainly like to talk on the topic. Hi, Richard.
I feel like we've been the stranger and for our whole time here. We haven't really been able to host anyone. But I guess we've learned about being a guest. One thing here, some of us have internships and we've been offered coffee. And at first I was like, no, don't make me coffee. I don't want to be a burden upon you. But part of their culture is making coffee and drinking coffee and sitting together and talking for an hour or two before the day starts, and that's part of work. And so being a guest, I've had to learn that it's okay to accept things, and that's more, I should do that so I can let the host feel like they're doing their job.
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about how hospitality is always going to be imperfect, and there's always going to be this strange relationship between the host and the guest, and it's really hard to understand each other across cultural differences. But I think we really drove home the idea that like still we could try, and whether that be seeing the face of the other or whatever.
I think it's important.
Go ahead, please.
It's also important to remember that you can never fully understand the stranger. You have to keep, there's always going to be a little bit of distance between your understanding of their experience and their actual experience. So you almost have to keep the stranger a little bit foreign to yourself. And in that way, you also remain a little bit foreign to them. Because I think it's important, especially as Americans, we've never experienced war on our home soil. So it's really important to like recognize that we can never truly understand what people who have experienced that went through, and so that trauma and what they need to recover from that trauma, because it's really easy for us to throw out solutions, but we never know if they're actually going to work because we haven't personally experienced that in the same way that other people have.
Right. What about some of what you've studied in this regard with the challenge of hospitality between ethnicities and between religions and so on? Here I'm thinking of the phenomenon of scapegoating that we've talked about a bit. Maybe somebody can speak to that, what you learned there?
Yeah, in our philosophy class, we talked a lot about scapegoating and how that's used to find communities, and like the underlying factor behind that is that we're afraid of like being other, or we're like threatened by seeing other people who live lives that conflict with our own, and like how foreignness leads to like us rejecting the person we perceive as the foreigner. But I feel like I'm thinking about how I am in like my study abroad experience so far. I feel like that mindset has definitely been sort of like a hindrance on me, because I like am so conscious of the fact that I'm the foreigner here and I don't want to like offend anyone or like I just don't know how to like interact with the culture in a way that is like respectful, but also because I don't want to be perceived as a foreigner, even though that's just a fact. So that's definitely like the question that I've been trying to deal with a lot of that.
Yeah, that is one of the challenges, isn't it? Is to be present in a culture, to be yourself, but to do so in a way that respects the differences, the cultural differences. So I think we're always kind of navigating that space. Interesting. One of the things we talked a lot about as we went to Vukovar and as we went to Sarajevo, which of course Sarajevo was under siege for 3.5 years. Vukovar was destroyed in the war, as you mentioned, Anju. And the people have suffered a great amount of trauma in these different situations. One of the tasks that we've been thinking about is what to do with that trauma, how to deal with that trauma, why it's important at least to deal with it. And so far as we see, and history has kind of taught us, and I think we can see here too, that if we don't deal with it in some way, it's going, the violence is going to repeat itself. So what maybe somebody can speak to, what have you learned about how trauma can affect relationship and how we might approach trauma in a healthy way, both individually and collectively?
Maybe I'll just throw in that we've also read a lot of works of literature that embody all of these dynamics, and trauma has been a big one. So feel free to speak through that as well if you have some books you want to highlight.
We've talked a lot about memorials and how they should be used, whether they just continue anger or whether they're a healing thing. We've talked about the difference between mourning and melancholy. And melancholy is just to sit, not accepting that you've lost something and being able to move on from that. So if you're stuck in that state of melancholy, you're not going to be able to move past your trauma. And some memorials do keep people in that place, whereas other memorials are able to move into mourning, where you do accept what you've lost and that you can't get it back, and then you're able to.
Anybody want to follow up on that? I mean, how would you, maybe you could talk a little bit about the difference between those types of memorials in terms of what you experienced, right? So I'm thinking of what, we go to this, as Anju mentioned before, we typically go to this hospital in Vukovar, and it serves as a memorial. It's kind of a historical museum memorial. And I think a lot of us, I don't want to speak for you, but I think a lot of us typically experience this memorial, go through it, and come out not necessarily with any sort of catharsis, but actually feeling more kind of riled up, right? Would you agree with that? And then the question is that doing its job? Is that what we're supposed to be doing with memorials? And is that right or problematic? And maybe then there's another kind of memorializing too that Anju has mentioned. They follow up on that?
Yeah, I mean, Hannah said that in her presentation that the hospital memorial is one of the top places for dark tourism.
Yeah.
Place that people go to, like, I don't know, see dark things and stuff like that. But
Spectators.
yeah, but I agree that walking out of that hospital was so tough, and everybody was just so upset and like stirred up inside. It didn't really do anything to make you feel hopeful, which I feel like memorials, in order to move you into that place of mourning and moving forward in that, the core talks about education. Like, I feel like that's what memorials are supposed to do. So I don't know, going to the Yasenovitz Memorial, they had the museum, and so I feel like that was more of an educational experience.
Yeah, and just to mention, so the Yasenovitz is a memorial we go to first, which is a World War II memorial where genocide took place. It was a concentration camp where during the Nazi regime in Croatia, Croats killed over 80,000 Serbs and Jews and Roma. So Croats, let's say, we don't want to put that on everybody, but the Croatian regime was perpetrating violence against Serbs. And then 50 years later, on the same trip, we go to the next place, which is Vukovar and Hospital Memorial, where Croats were now being attacked by Serbs. So the situation is reversed, sort of a revenge situation. We look at these memorials. But the hospital memorial, one of the reasons I think it's so traumatic is there was an attempt to represent exactly what happened because people were hiding in the atomic shelter in a hospital in the only part of city where you could hide at all from the constant shelling of 3 months. And so the memorial actually has dolls wrapped in bandages throughout this area. And there was a desire not to leave anything out. And it's very hard, I think, I don't know if you would agree, to say, you know, I don't want to respect that and what happened there. And yet you leave more scandalized than having learned anything, or maybe even being able to empathize. Would you agree with that? Or
Definitely. I think especially taking in the victim perpetrator dynamic, like because the Serbs were the victims of this, it is really meant to arouse anger, I think, inside people who come and look at it, or even if not anger, like kind of confusion and maybe a little bit of distaste towards the Serbs. But in Jasenovac, the Croatians were the perpetrators. And so they were, you know, they were willing to acknowledge what they did, which is great, but they also paint it in a more, I think, educational and emotional way, so that you can maybe almost sympathize with them a little bit, or they just kind of are trying to get the full image, the full scene, I think, of what was happening during that time. Whereas it's a very one-sided experience at the Bucharest Hospital.
Would you say that anything you experienced, whether in Jasenovac or in Sarajevo, allowed for you to connect to that process of mourning and solidarity with the victims in a more cathartic and healthy way? I'm even thinking of maybe the Childhood War Museum or something.
I would say the Srebrenica Museum did it for me. In Sarajevo, we went to a museum. There was, during the Serbian ethnic cleansing of Bosniak Muslims during the 90s in Bosnia, there was a town that was under siege called Srebrenica, and massive casualties and fatalities. But they put together a museum in Sarajevo for this town, and it was, I would say, I think it was very well done. There was a lot of images and personal testimonies of the people who experienced and lived in Srebrenica. And I can't really explain or vocalize why it was so powerful, but it was very simple. Like, it was just a black and white room, photos, and you were listening to the stories and watching a few videos. So there was no like fanfare about it. It was just very simple, kind of giving you a story. And I found it very cathartic. There were definitely some tears shed.
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting because in Vukovar Hospital with all the mannequins, you actually can't cry about it. You're just in shock of some kind.
Like a reenactment of that shock or something.
I would say being able to talk to Amra, who's a peacekeeper in Bosnia, and just the way that she tells the stories about being a victim of the siege of Sarajevo, and then like what she's done after that to not make herself a victim, but to take action and to ensure active peace and prevent more violence from happening as best as she can. And that was really encouraging for me to like go back home and try to take more action.
I thought a really impactful non-memorial was in Belgrade when we went to the site of a concentration camp for Serbian Jews that was not a memorial. I mean, like, I've never seen something like that where it was formerly the fairgrounds. Yeah, the fairgrounds for like the World Fair or something. So it's meant to be a place of celebration. There are all these different buildings to house the different delegations from countries that were supposed to be at the World Fair. And then instead the fairgrounds were used to house Jews, and without being too graphic, it was like they pioneered kind of the idea of killing Jews with gas and
trucks,
with trucks there. And it's not indicated as a memorial at all. You might not even know it if you walk past. Some of those buildings are being used as restaurants now, and it kind of sits under the underpass of the highway. So having come from Jasenovac, which is also a World War II concentration camp memorial, it was so much weirder to think about the fact that this place was almost purposely being forgotten instead of remembered, you know, incorrectly or correctly or whatever, but that you could just forget about something. I think almost the entire Jewish population of Belgrade was like exterminated there.
It was the second country Nazis pronounced Judenfrei. Within a year, they got rid of all of the Jews, and it was right there, and there's no mention of it. Well, maybe we can just now turn to like final portion, which is where we want to ask you about what are you going to take away from this with you. So my first question is, going back to America in 10 days, what you've studied and experienced, can you take back with you to your life in America? And then sub questions are maybe to your studies, communities, and if you have any specific examples. We're just starting to turn towards, what does it mean to reintegrate? So this is a first step towards that, but anything you think that will stay with you or be even helpful as you go back to various aspects of your life.
I feel like for me, because I'm a psychology major, I wasn't really exposed to these topics going in. But I think that studying war and violence is important because while growing up, it was very like far removed from me. Even throughout like middle school, high school education, we really like learn it in school because we don't have war on our own home soil. But you realize like throughout studying this that the same patterns of violence, the factors that lead to war are prevalent in other realms of violence that are still prevalent today in America and everywhere, like racism, homophobia, these bigger subjects. And so to be able to like discern patterns of violence in your own personal lives, I think will help with a broader view of it.
And going off that, it was fascinating to me to learn that the people of Yugoslavia never thought the country would fall apart or the Federation would fall apart. And like, they really believed it was like paradise of a sort, but it fairly quickly devolved into a series of very brutal and bloody wars. And so I think kind of having the same mindset back in America, even like we kind of have this sense of infallibility and like a high an intoxication of power, I think. But it's important to recognize what if we fall, maybe we already are, but if we fall into a state of passive peace, it's important for us, especially as young people who are growing up in this age, to really adopt an active mindset and like genuinely work for the justice and causes that we want to see enacted, as opposed to like Sonia said, where if you kind of let it all run by you, you'll realize that you're actually falling, you're regressing rather than staying stagnant or progressing as we should be.
Culturally, also, I think Croatia has more of a balanced life that they promote. Like in the United States, where like you go to school, you work is what's important. But here, they meet each other and drink coffee in the afternoons, which although we think that means they do nothing, that's not what it means. And they give women more time off when they've had a baby. And there's just more of a sense of you're here to live life, not just to work your whole life. I was having a conversation with a Uber driver, and he was like, I have a friend in Texas, he worked all his life. And I am like, what are you doing? Why are you working? You should be enjoying your life. I drink coffee, I enjoy my grandkids, and I only work a little bit. So it's just interesting to hear his perspective.
I mean, maybe as if you have other ideas about your personal life, I also wanted to ask you about the insights and experiences you've had through classes, travel, guest lectures, considering the falling apart of Yugoslavia and the wars after that. Do you have any thoughts about the challenge of navigating polarized American society as we find it today? So just a very small question for you.
I think being more mindful of like the mechanisms of violence has helped me a lot to see like, okay, what are the things that are occurring in America and why are they occurring? And also what can I do to help facilitate a more active type of peace, whether that just be with like my classmates or my friends. Like, I feel like the small differences are important. So just being aware of like the scapegoat and understanding that everybody has different ideas of justice.
I think that one of the things that I would take home about polarization is probably something that was like revealed to us through the Yugoslavia war, kind of like the American Civil War, was how easy it was for people who knew each other personally to immediately turn on each other, and with the atmosphere of violence that was present, to commit some really terrible acts. So thinking about what that means back home, and maybe like for me at least thinking about Thanksgiving at home and those people who are really close members of your family, but you get to Thanksgiving and you're like, I can't talk politics with them. I know what's going to happen. It's going to explode. Well, it's your responsibility not to explode and also to talk. That's one of the things I think that I've learned, especially in the context of the Croatian communitarian society, which is like a whole other thing. Just the fact that people are less individualistic and the things that bind people together are sometimes a bit stronger than, you know, like one, you said your friends won't leave you alone for the rest of your life. You know, maybe trying to create something a little bit closer to that when you get back home, for me.
Thank you.
Thank you guys,
Very
being
helpful.
very thoughtful. I'm just thinking in terms of, you keep talking about community in Croatia, collectivistic life, but I'm looking at you guys there on the couch and I'm thinking, you had a bit of that amongst yourselves, right? Was that a different experience for you from being on campus? Has it been worth it, or is how's peace and conflict working out?
Being in a cohort?
Yeah.
I think we've liked it. I'll speak for myself and say I have enjoyed it. We live in one apartment together, and then there was a group of four other students from another smaller college in Massachusetts who lived together as well. So it was just the 9 of us in class every day, and sometimes we would even split up and have just BC kids in class and then the other students in another class. So it was a very intimate setting. But personally, I really enjoyed it. It is different, I think, from the typical study abroad experience where you're in a big university, but we just had such in-depth conversations about the history and politics and culture of the region that I think it was pretty invaluable. And I think we got a lot closer than I think we would have in a normal study abroad program as well. So it's been great. I'm liking the cohort model.
Yeah, it's
That's
been,
incredible.
I feel like, I mean, I've had the same group of friends at BC since freshman year, and I haven't really branched out of that. And this gave me an opportunity to really get to know people who are a little bit different than me, but like, it's so good to meet people who are different than you and have different ideas and perspectives. And I might not have been able to do that if I wasn't forced to do it. So I think
Great. Thank you, guys. Maybe we can open it to questions from the audience.
Let me just first say how wonderful it is to see Andrew and Megan and Vivian and Adrian and Sonia. I haven't seen you very recently, but I'm so glad to see you today and to hear about your experience this fall. I can't wait to welcome you back to campus and do again that process of bringing you back to campus and helping you reflect on your experiences as you return to the US. With us today, we have students who are going on the program in the spring semester, and I know that they will have some questions, and I want to make sure we have enough time, but I also want to welcome Professor Richard Carney again, and I'm so glad that he is joining us today. And because we've heard you reflect so much on what it's like to be in Croatia and in the region right now, just taking it back and to the theme of International Education Week this year at BC and why we're here, and just recognizing through that theme that testing events over the past year, also here at home, illuminate an ongoing need for tolerance, optimism, and endurance through difficulties. And so just to kind of close that theme before we open it up for questions of all kinds. So that's all I wanted to say. And here's an opportunity for questions. We're a small group today, so please turn your mic on, or if you feel more comfortable writing in the chat, I can help moderate those questions as well. Thank you, everyone.
By the way, could I say a quick word? I have to go and teach soon, but I'd just like to make a quick comment, not at all to get in the way of the question and answers amongst the students, which is the object of the exercise. No, just to say how struck I am listening to you all describe your time there in Croatia by the difference between learning about peace and hospitality and welcoming the stranger in a class purely academically, say here in BC, where I teach such classes, and actually being there on the ground and being able to do field work with James and Petra, visiting Vukovar and Sarajevo, and obviously, you know, Zagreb, but these places of huge conflict, and visiting those memorials, and the Holocaust mementos, and the whole notion of truth and reconciliation tribunals that are going on in Northern Ireland, Croatia, South Africa. But to visit these places, it seems to me, is so enriching. And not many of you talk theory. We didn't hear much about Ricoeur or Levinas or Derrida or Kant on hospitality and the stranger, because you're actually living it. I mean, obviously you're doing those kinds of readings, but I was struck by all the examples you gave were of actually visiting people and places, and how important that is to move from theory to action. And lastly, I was struck by the comment about going home to Thanksgiving and sitting at table and wanting to explode, an experience I think we all have. And the importance of not exploding, i.e. of listening, and at the same time of expressing one's point of view without falling into a sort of a reaction of conflict. And I think that's big. They say charity begins at home, famous Ignatian Christian expression. Well, so does peace. And sometimes it's harder at home. Civil wars are harder sometimes than transnational or international wars, because one is with one's closest and most dearest. And when differences arise there, particularly around political issues, and God knows the United States is a very, very divided society at the moment, it's so hard to put the theory into practice sitting at the Thanksgiving table. So I'm with you all, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks,
Great
Richard.
to see you.
It's getting close to 1, and this is the lunch hour here in Boston, and people need to return to class and other activities, but we have room for some questions. So if you're with us and you like to ask a question, please turn your microphone on and speak up.
I do have a question, actually.
Hi, Antonio. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Antonio, and well, I have no knowledge at all of Croatian culture or the language, but I'm still very excited to attend in the spring. But I wanted to ask you all, like, culturally, when you first arrived there, and I'm assuming without too much knowledge about the culture and the language, was it paralyzing, overwhelming, or exciting, the first feeling?
Yeah, I think honestly the biggest difference is that they don't have big iced coffees to go in a cup. Which, it's nice to appreciate your coffee drinking, but if that was the biggest difference, then
We talked about the importance of trauma, right?
Yeah, and I think, hi Antonio, I think it wasn't really that big of a shock, at least not in a paralyzing way, especially because a lot of people here speak English. So if you're in a store, you're not going to be completely shut off from any help. They will greet you in Croatian, but once you're oh, I'm so sorry, do you speak English? Or you just start talking in English, they will switch over for you. But I also think a lot of the customs, it feels very European and pretty Western here. A lot of the customs in our daily life, I would say is pretty familiar.
When we started on Vista, wait, sorry. Okay. Well, we started on Vista, and the people there who are Croatian, the whole year round, because it's kind of a vacation place, are typically older Croatian people. And I wouldn't shut up about how I felt everyone was staring at me. I felt very seen and exposed. But that's that's just me, kind of.
Well, we have a cultural Croatian stare.
Yeah.
Part of collectivistic
yeah.
culture is you can look at each other without feeling odd about it. So We explain how to deal with it. I mean, we have advice.
They stare, but they
Stare
don't
right
smile. So it's just like you're walking down the street, everyone's making eye contact with each other. It's like BC look away, but the opposite.
There's a BC look away.
Yeah.
Amount of time
Where you
is
just, like,
appropriate before you look
avoid
away.
eye contact.
Yeah, that's not Croatia.
They don't say anything, they just look at you, acknowledge you.
In Croatia, as in I think with a number of other cultures, you're just sort of public. And so you're fair game for looking at. People will find you interesting, and so they'll look at you. And it's a kind of strange phenomenon.
Yeah, that just sounds really weird.
There's no innuendo to it, right? It's just what it is.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, you're here, you're a person, you're interesting. I'd like to look at you rather than a building.
So I mean, often, and right, I don't mean to make it sound weird. But often I'll be, this took some getting used to for me too, Antonio. I'd be at a coffee shop, just sitting there drinking my coffee, and I'd look up and I'll see an older man or something just kind of staring at me. And I'm like, do I know him? Am I supposed to say something? What's going on? No, he's just kind of checking me out. And then I can look back and check him out. And we can kind of sit there and sip our coffee and look at each other and then go our separate ways. It's a very different experience. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, they mentioned they came to VC. Croatia does have a lot of foreign visitors. Very popular. It's interesting. Like, I think the deep experiences you guys are studying, we've studied together, overshadowing the beauty. But actually, when you come here, the place is beautiful, right? It's why people go here, other than talk about things we talk about.
There's definitely a good balance between, like, we learn about hard things, but then we also get to do fun things and see cute farmers markets and go to coffee shops and meet people. So it's not, sometimes you do have to take time for yourself to cope with everything you're learning about, but you have your people and
Bye, Antonio. I think Antonio's in the screen photo, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
We're waiting for other questions. And as we wait, what has it been like for you abroad at a time when our world has changed so much during the pandemic? And have you felt that in the same way that we have felt it here? And what has been different or challenging or just perfect for you?
It's been a nice return to normalcy. I've honestly felt really normal. COVID is blowing up currently, but for most of the semester it's pretty under control, I think. So it wasn't like an active part of our day. I mean, you're wearing masks when you walk into grocery stores and things like that, but for the most part, and a lot of Croatians, the coffee shops and restaurants are outside, so you're pretty open, you're in the air anyways. But I think it's been nice, and especially having such a small group, there's not a lot of anxiety about it because we're doing most of our activities together. So there's not a huge like group of people that we need to be worried about bringing the virus into us, and having classes with just us, like in a lovely home and cultural center. It's just, yeah, it's very small, it's very intimate. So I haven't worried about it.
Thank you.
We're happy to answer any other questions if they're not, we haven't mentioned something, feel free to bring it up if it's on your mind about the program or even the topic and the questions of dealing with conflict. I think we're all ready to go. We just had a semester conference recently and had a day-long discussion. So we're good if you want to challenge us and ask us. They're saying speak for myself, but okay, I'm good with it.
There was a fair amount of Richard Carney referenced in the conference also. So if Professor Carney wants to ask anything, I'm sure we'd be happy to do our best to answer it also.
Well, the last thing I want to do is put those poor, unfortunate BC students on the hot seat after 50 minutes of discussion. No, I've sort of listened and learned from you today. So, when you come back to BC campus, I'd be delighted to meet you anytime, and perhaps we'll overlap in courses and so on. I presume you're all undergraduates, yeah? And yeah, so hopefully we'll get a chance to continue the conversation when you're back, but I won't put you into the interrogation seat at this late hour. So just good to see you all.
Great.
Wonderful. And it seems like it's dinner time in Croatia, or still a little early? About
Well, at 7, but we'll have a follow-up dinner after this. Right now.
Well, it's been wonderful spending this hour together. And again, I'm so happy to see everyone. Thank you again for this presentation, for your reflections. This session is recorded and we will be sharing it with other students and faculty. And again, I want to thank everyone for being part of International Education Week at Boston College.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you, Christina, for
Thank
organizing
you, Richard.
this.
Thanks,
Thank you.
students.
Oh, good to see you all.